Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Leadership Cogs, the micro learning series built around the four pillars of progressive performance. It's celebration, ownership, the glue that leads to growth, and stretching into your next. I'm Farnia Furnell, founder and president of the Lensworth Group. This whole quarter, we've been talking about the steps that are important to shift your thinking from execution or laser focus, which is only heads down, to advisory interactions, which are more proactive, present, and engaged. So, a few of you who've been following along have challenged the series, and I love it. I've heard someone ask, what about those team members who are hired explicitly to execute? And my thinking about that is exactly the same. They can get things done, but if they don't know why they're doing what they're doing, it becomes more difficult for them to critique their own work. And it might even diminish their confidence in what they've done. And it might have you correcting the same issue over and over and over again. Nobody likes that. For example, if you're manufacturing and something like that happens, it can be costly if people don't know why something went wrong on the manufacturing line. If you're in professional services, it might diminish your authority if someone's encountering the same challenges and that gets to your client. Either way, I advocate for individuals periodically to ask themselves advisory questions like, how is what I'm doing going to be used? And why does my client actually need this? So today we're continuing our execution to advisory series, and I'm really excited to do that. And this episode today is called The Recommendations. So let's jump right in. And I'll share with you a dilemma that I heard years ago. I was coaching a consultant, and this consultant was smart, genuinely brilliant, the kind of person who could walk into a room, assess the dynamics, synthesize the data, and within a reasonable amount of time tell you exactly what needed to happen. He was thorough. His recommendations were well researched, evidence based, and clearly articulated all the time. And he was frustrated almost to the point of disillusionment. He came to me after a client encounter and said, "You know what, Farnia, I don't understand. I gave them exactly what they needed, and the data was clear. The path was clear. And you know what? They're not going to do it." He'd done every part of his job by any conventional measure. And I asked him, I said, it sounds like you did a really thorough analysis. And when you made that recommendation, I just wonder, whose future did you have in mind? Was it yours or was it theirs? When I asked the question, he got silent. And after more than 2 decades in advisory and coaching, supporting leaders and teams across 51 countries, the gap between a good recommendation and an implemented recommendation or approach is almost never about the quality of the insight. It's almost always about the quality of the relationship and the relevance of the framing. In this instance, he really took it personally. And honestly, of course he did. When you work that hard on a recommendation, when you care that much about getting it right, and the people who paid you to do it don't act on it, it hurts. It feels like rejection, and it feels like a judgment of your competence if you're in an advisory capacity. So I'm bringing this up because our whole series is about jumping from execution to advisory. And I'm raising this because this is one of the most reported challenges in making that jump. I tried to offer my perspective and it was poo pooed, it was shut down. And it might have been shut down in a fierce way. It might have been shut down and made you feel bad. It might have been shut down and embarrassed you. Here's what I told him. And it's the thing I really want to spend most of this episode on with you. He wasn't actually being rejected. And his recommendation wasn't necessarily being dismissed. And the failure, or if you even want to call it a failure, it wasn't his failure. He did his role. The role was to think systems thinking, think of the whole picture, not just the little piece that you're doing. If something's wrong and it's fed to you, what you do then becomes worse. If something's wrong and it's leaving you and going somewhere else, if you don't give someone else the heads up about that, that can lead their work to be compromised and rework for everyone. So the failure didn't exist in making a recommendation. The failure was potentially a role confusion. And you know what? It might be really common. It's really expensive. I can guarantee you that it's really expensive and it's really, really corrosive. And when you're going from execution, meaning I'm doing this thing and I think I'm doing it right, to advisory, and again, those recommendations aren't resonating, it doesn't mean failure. It can feel like failure. It doesn't mean failure. I just want to stress that point. So let's jump into what it means to recommend. Talk about something really fundamental. Because if you get this wrong, every recommendation you ever make is going to feel like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Your role, if you're stepping into being an advisory or making recommendations, is not to get the thing that you're recommending done. That's not, it's just to be proactive and think holistically. It's not more execution. It's just simply saying, this is what I'm doing. And I wonder about this or consider this. It's insight, it's framing, it's influence, even. And this sounds simple, but it's not actually simple to do. It's one of the most difficult personal shifts that you might have to make when dealing with your clients. Remember, we started calling them clients a couple episodes back. So if you're coming up through execution, meaning I get this done and I do it well, and if your identity is built around getting these things done, and you're someone who really cares about the outcomes that you create, this is going to feel a little uncomfortable. Caring only about the outcomes here can become a trap. In fact, it can make the client's decision feel personal because you are too tied to an outcome, a what if. And it can make non implementation feel like rejection. So you can go from, oh my gosh, I'm stepping into just taking a risk and offering a perspective to, oh, you know what, I'm not doing that anymore because it doesn't work. So I'm just offering again that as a perspective. So think about advisory recommendations across three dimensions. The first is context. The second is evidence. And the third is framing. And I'll break down each one. So context is this. Context is when you help a stakeholder or your client understand why you're even saying this. Why does this particular recommendation matter now? Not why it matters abstractly, like, oh, I think perhaps maybe. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're saying, why does this matter now? Given the current reality, the current pressure, the current history, whatever's happening right now, why does this matter? That's why you're taking a risk and sharing it, because there's something going on here that might be at risk. If you skip the context, your recommendations is like, okay, why are you telling me this? What do you want me to do? I'm like, I've got a lot of stuff to do that's important, and now you want me to think about something else. So if you miss that context or drawing that connection, there's no gravity, there's no weight, there's no urgency because you haven't connected those pieces. The evidence. So the evidence is about your credibility, and it answers the question when you're working with a client. And even if they don't say it out loud, it's always in the back of their head. How do you know? So when you're offering a perspective, the question might be, how do you know? So your evidence is data. It's a precedent. It's the patterns you've observed. I've been doing this for a long time and this is what I've seen. This particular batch didn't match. Okay. This didn't match what we've done before. Or if we continue doing this, I've seen this become a snafu when we tried this before, but it wasn't exactly the same way. I'm just sharing it now because I don't want the same thing to happen. So when you could bring analogies from other environments, it bolsters your credibility. And not to say that your clients or your stakeholders or your leader, whoever you're talking to and offering the insight, not to say they don't believe you already, but this is double clicking and saying, this is what I see, and this is why I think this is different. Technical evidence delivered by a technical person matters. Technical evidence delivered to a non-technical audience, sometimes there's confusion because they don't know how you do what you do. So if you don't offer that second layer, it's like, well, okay, well, what do you want me to do with this? How is this different? And they may not even say it that way. Then lastly, the framing. So when we're talking about framing, framing tends to be underrated. When you're going from execution to advisory, sometimes framing does not exist at all. But framing has to be deliberate because somebody has to understand not just what you're recommending, but what's going to make it possible and what is this protecting against. So if you're saying this something might go wrong, doing what you said to do or considering what you said to do is going to protect in what way? So a good recommendation, if you don't actually package it, it's not going to land. Okay. So if you don't put that framing, put the boundaries around it, it's not going to land. So from here, let's continue to go. Let's get even more practical than that. How do advisory communications sound? What does it actually look like to communicate a recommendation in the way a trusted advisor would? I want to give you these 5 practices, these 5 things that tend to work across industries, across cultures, across organizational levels. And the first one is this: lead with empathy, lead from their world, not yours. You've seen a lot of things, you've been a lot of places. You perhaps have been a lot of places. I don't want to, offer that generically. You've seen a lot of circumstances because you are the expert at whatever you're executing on. But consider how they're receiving what it is that you might be doing. Before you state your recommendation, demonstrate that you understand first. You understand the context that they're operating in, the pressures, just so you can say, I get you, and I think this is for you. So you're like, well, but I do this work all the time. Why do I need to restate that I get you? Because in the absence of it, someone's going to think, okay, that's great. Thank you for stepping out of your role and offering me this, but you don't know what I'm going through. That's easy to dismiss you and whatever you recommended if you don't actually do that, if you don't demonstrate some type of empathy. I always like to talk about advisories. Lead with empathy, lead with emotional intelligence. Number 2, separate the recommendation from the rationale. And this looks like this: state your recommendation really clearly and state it early. And don't bury it like, oh, okay, if you read this whole document I created for you and on page 32, you might see what I thought. That's not helpful. That's not helpful. Usually in these circumstances, like I talked about earlier, there's an urgency behind it. You're offering an insight, not because you just want to, do everyone else's job. And that's not what you're doing. You're saying, this is what I see, and this is how it may affect you. So state that up front because it's almost like a hook. You're grabbing attention and you're demonstrating that you're in line with the moment. You are present to the moment and what the real factors are that are at play for that person and even yourself. When advisors or you're operating in an advisory way and you're able to weave this together, right? Walk through your rationale. Your stakeholders, your clients, they're processing what you say as you're explaining the reasoning. So if they miss half of what you say, you don't want that to happen. So state it, let it land, let them digest it, and then build a case. Practice number 3, name the implications, name the risks in both directions, positive and negative. What does moving forward actually make possible? And if you don't take action that I'm making a recommendation for, What's at risk? So a sophisticated advisor would talk about both, not in a way that kind of feels like pressure, but in a way that feels like a complete picture. You're presenting the full situation and you're not tied to one outcome. You're making sure they have everything they need in order to make the decision themselves, not for you to make the decision on their behalf. It is not your role to make that decision. It's simply to offer your perspective because you, as the expert in your own space, as the expert in your execution, you see something that might not work in the future. The fourth, invite a response before you defend. In fact, I would say don't defend at all. Okay. Invite a response. So if you shared something and it's like, whoa, wait a second here. If you shared something and it's a big deal, let someone digest it first. This particular practice can separate a really good advisor, meaning someone who's respected, someone who's able to be influential, from someone who's just not. Okay. So if you defend your position, that means you're missing the whole picture and you are siloed into just your work. No one project is ever about one person. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a project, it would be a task. Okay. If it's only about one person, if there's an initiative and it only is about one person, it's a task. It's not a project. It's not an initiative. It's not collaborative. What we're talking about, moving from execution, meaning I do things, I do things, I do things, I do things, to I do things in the context of a system or a context of a project, and I hand them off because things don't end with me. When you consider the whole picture, then it's never about defending your small position because you're one cog, just to use our word cog, you're one cog in a bigger wheel, a much bigger wheel. So after you present a recommendation, instead of immediately reinforcing the recommendation, just pause and say, hey, what do you think about that? Or how does it like, what's going on for you? Or what am I not seeing? Like, again, I've been doing this and what am I not seeing? Like, I saw this as a potential challenge. Like, what am I not seeing? And what this does is it invites communication and it communicates confidence. Like, I saw something different. If do you see it too? And if you do, let's talk about it. You're not afraid of the pushback. And initially, when you're moving from execution mindset to advisory, you're likely going to be afraid of pushback because when someone tells you no or not right now, you're going to take it personal. And taking it personal doesn't move the agenda forward. It doesn't. There might be resistance because no one wants to hear bad news. No one wants to hear bad news. It might mean rework. It might mean you invest more or they need to invest more. It might mean further escalation. There's a lot that it might mean. So don't be surprised if there's pushback. Don't be surprised if you get a, oh no, I don't think so. And don't shut down because you've gotten that response. Know that it will likely be the first response because no one wants to feel like they're blindsided or there was a gap that they didn't see. So invite in a conversation and that'll give you real-time intelligence about what's going on and where they might need more support. All right. So the fifth one is close with their next steps, not yours. This is not about you. It's about you seeing something that might be off and making a recommendation to be proactive and in support of the whole, not in support of, oh, well, I get to do this because I shared this thing with you. So don't end a recommendation conversation with, let me know what you think. That puts ambiguity on the client side. Like, let me know what you think. Okay, well, I didn't have a problem before, so I think that you just put something in my lap and I don't really know what you want me to do with it. Instead, if you end that kind of conversation, like I shared this thing with you, I see something is off. What would be helpful as a next step for you? What would be helpful to progress this? If you choose to progress it, what would be helpful? Or even who else needs to be part of this conversation. So asking one of those two things could support that shift in their mindset. Remember, number one was leading with empathy. And when someone feels as if they might be blindsided or they might have missed something, their defenses are going to go up, way up. So, positioning yourself in a helpful manner, what would be helpful as a next step for you? Who else needs to be part of this conversation before you might consider taking any action? You're staying in an advisory posture. You're not necessarily like, okay, I'm tossing this problem on you and now I'm going to run back to my work. Okay. It's a difference between supporting their decision-making process while also keeping some momentum. You're not saying, okay, I did this thing and now I can't do anything else because until you make a decision, that's a lot of pressure. Instead, you're saying, what else? Is there something else that might be a helpful next step for you? And if so, who else might need to be part of the conversation? Or what is it? You're not taking on more work. It's simply saying, what else could be helpful? You're not taking the responsibility to do the next thing. All right. Okay. So let's talk about cogs. This is leadership cogs. So how do we keep the cogs going? So I'll talk about each pillar. You spent this episode on this pain point of just becoming an advisor or thinking in advisory way. And you listened as I talked about the what can happen here and what tends to happen, the defensiveness, the wanting to shut down and like go run and go back to your execution role. There's nothing with being wrong with being in execution. This is just like sometimes something's off and you need to escalate in some way. So I'd like to close with a couple questions tied to COGS. When you were in execution, you always knew when you were done. When you're only focused on execution, there are rules likely. You might close a project, you might hit a milestone, you might be done for the day, or a deliverable might be, considered finished. But in reality, in advisory work, the work keeps on going. It doesn't just stop. It's like any opportunity to be in your work is an opportunity to consider what's different about this work, what's different about this circumstance. So here's your question. What does a win look like for you now? And what does it look like if you are to step into a little bit of an advisor stance? What's the difference? Just I want you to consider what the difference might be because a win now might be again, I'm done for now. I'm done with this ticket. I'm done with this thing. We finished this, run on if you're in manufacturing. You finished this thing. And if you were acting a little bit advisory and just injecting some proactivity into what you do, what would sound different? The O in ownership. So in execution, your opinion is part of your role. You're just expected to have a view or, drive towards doing your thing with that view. In an advisor capacity, it's slightly different. You have to have a strong point of view and still make space for the client or whoever's receiving whatever you say to reach their own conclusion. Your conclusion is not their conclusion. So this is a question for you. Where are you pushing your thing, your conclusion, your recommendation, when you could be planting a seed for them to research, for them to decide to act on, for them to grow trust in you? Think about a recent conversation with your leader, with someone internal that you might be working with. Were you facilitating their thinking or were you lobbying for your cause and for your whatever your thing is? There's a difference. And your client, your team, whoever it is, they're going to feel it. The G. So the transition from execution to advisory is it's not like you're changing a role per se. It's really a change in your relationship and how you're at relationship or in relationship with your work and with your stakeholders. When in execution, you might, again, someone's waiting on you to do something. When you think advisory, it's a mindset shift. And someone needs you, they need to trust you. They need to feel trust in you and to be certain that when you're saying something, it is not selfish. Rather, it is comprehensive and it's collaborative. So, question here could be, are you building relationships or are you managing engagements and managing tasks? Engagements will end, but relationships are what gets you called into higher levels of work and really gets you trusted, to be honest. So the S, the stretch into next. So we will wrap with this one. When you're execution minded, you're the expert of a solution, and there may not be too much stretch in your solution. When you are sharing or being proactive and advisory, you have to be an expert on the person, not an expert on the thing. So, an expert on the person. How are they going to receive what I say? Remember, we talked about empathy. What are their fears? What are their pressures? What are they protecting? What are they hoping nobody notices? So, how well do you actually know your client or your leader or your stakeholder? And this isn't like a psychoanalysis. This is simply, how well do you know them? And are you leading with empathy when you have whatever conversation and making a recommendation? So those are a few questions that can support you. And to close out this story, I'll go back to the conversation I shared with you earlier with the consultant that I coached. And he recently called me and shared an update. He said a client he worked with, came back and they were finally going to implement the solution that he had recommended. And they were doing it nearly exactly or identically the way that he recommended. He was really pleased about it. Now, it didn't happen in his timeline. It happened in their own timeline. And he was laughing as he was telling me the story because he had grown enough by that point to find it genuinely funny rather than frustrating. So he went from frustration, like they're not doing what I said, to, you know what? They're actually doing it and it's going to work. And that's the mark of being in an advisory capacity where you can separate the personal from what's going on, which is not personal at all. So insight only matters if this leads to action. So I am encouraging you, what is the action that you might take to be proactive and to operate a little more advisory? Do your work, try to communicate, plant some seeds, trust the process. And I welcome you to join me as we close out the series on June 22nd in Becoming the Advisor. We're going to talk about what it takes to become the advisor. So this is Leadership Cogs, and I will close out with Seed Your Potential. You can connect with me, use this QR code to do that. As always, take care and be well. Thank you for being here.